two certain medications that, when taken together, quote, have a real chance to be one of the biggest game changers in the history of medicine, and that they should be, quote, put in use immediately. Since he's not here, I can't ask him what he meant, but I'm wondering if Dr. Fauci or the Admiral could clarify if you have any sense of what he was talking about, and whether his 74.5 million Twitter followers should be taking medical advice from him or from someone else.
The president brought together the top pharmaceutical companies in America and in the world a number of weeks ago, and they formed a consortium to work on a range of responses, beginning with therapeutics, which for a layman like me, that just means medicine to make you feel better. They're already going to work on that. We actually think, Dr. Fauci, I think there's some sense that that our great pharmaceutical companies may actually be producing therapeutics that will give relief to Americans struggling with coronavirus as soon as this spring. We also challenge them to work together as rapidly as possible to develop a vaccine going forward. And as Dr. Fauci has indicated, we brought a vaccine to clinical trials now the better part of a week ago, the fastest time in history. Now, it's the first phase of the trials, and people should understand, as our health experts have described, that there'll be a period of as much as a year and a half before we can make those vaccines available. But as the president said at this podium, there is some anecdotal evidence that several existing medicines may have brought relief to patients struggling in China and in Europe. And the president has tasked the FDA to work very rapidly to allow what's called off-label use for those. One is a malaria medicine. But this morning, I think the president reiterated the hopefulness that he feels about this, that because these are medications that are time-honored and tested, they've been taken for many, many years, that we want to pursue, number one, making those available if someone's doctor believes that it's appropriate, and that the doctor would be able to prescribe that medicine even though that's not indicated. That's called an off-label use. But the other piece is, as Dr. Fauci said, and I'll yield to him, in deploying those medicines, we're working specifically with one state to do so in a way that represents a clinical trial. So it would not just be compassionate use, which the medicines are already being used for in some jurisdictions today, but also we could study it and determine the viability of it. And in fact, we're working diligently right now with that supply chain to make sure that those medicines are available. Dr. Fauci, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. You know, it's essentially what I said multiple times from this podium, is that when you have, first of all, we're trying to develop de novo drugs that are not yet out there, not approved, that ultimately would be effective. And the way you prove that is to do a randomized control trial to prove safety and efficacy. I'm not totally sure what the president was referring to, but I believe he's referring to a report that used both hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin together to have some possibility of being in effect. Many of the things that you hear out there are what I had called anecdotal reports. They may be true, but they're anecdotal. So the only thing that I was saying is that if you really want to definitively know if something works, that you've got to do the kind of trial that you get the good information. The president is talking about hope for people, and it's not an unreasonable thing to hope for people. So when you have approved drugs that physicians have the option in a decision between the physician and the patient, are you going to use a drug that someone says from an anecdotal standpoint, not completely proven, but might have some effect? There are those who lean to the point of giving hope and saying, give that person the option of having access to that drug. And then you have the other group, which is my job as a scientist, to say my job is to ultimately prove, without a doubt, that a drug is not only safe, but that it actually works. Those two things are really not incompatible when you think about that, particularly when you're in an arena where you don't have anything that's proven. We went through the same sort of thing with a little bit of a different twist during the HIV/AIDS epidemic until we finally developed drugs that were absolutely knockout drugs that were safe and that were effective. But in the beginning, there was that tension about that. So you really got to have a balance. I've got to do my job as a scientist, and others have other things to do.
Great.
Mr. Vice President, question for Dr. Carson? Yeah, question for
Let me just, if I may, let me just say, I hope this morning has been informative.